Most people think the loneliest job in the world would drive you a little strange, and maybe they're right. But I loved the hours nobody else wanted. Friday nights, when the rest of Montreal was crammed into the bars on Saint Laurent, or lining up outside the clubs in the cold, I was 3 floors up in a drafty atelier in Griffintown, with the space heater ticking and a 200-year-old cello clamped open on my bench. That was where I felt most like myself, alone with the smell of hide glue and spirit varnish, the little scrape of my knife lifting old grime-off spruce, the radiator knocking like something trying to get in. The dead things were better company than the living. They never lied to you. They never left. And they never once looked at you with that soft, careful pity. People got in their eyes the second they found out your father was doing federal time for a crime he didn't commit. I don't say that for sympathy. I'm just telling you how it was. The cello had come in that Tuesday through a private dealer, no name attached. Just a courier and a work order and a deposit that cleared before I could ask a single question. An old French instrument, the tag said, water damaged, needing the top removed and the bass bar reset. Standard enough. But when I got it open under the raking light, the interior didn't look right to me. There was a second layer glued to the inside of the back plate, thin as skin, and it wasn't old wood. It was paper. Onion skin, rolled flat and lacquered down. The kind of thing you'd never see unless you were the sort of person who spent her life looking at what's hiding underneath. Let's see what you're keeping quiet about, I said to the cello, the way I talk to all of them. And I slid my thinnest palette knife under the edge. I want to tell you I stopped when I realized what I was looking at. I didn't. I was too curious, and curiosity is the family disease. Under the shop's UV lamp, the paper lit up in rows. Numbers, dates, columns that my brain read before the rest of me caught up, because my father had taught me to read a ledger the way other dads teach their kids to skate. These weren't accounts for anything legal. Routing numbers, shell entities, amounts with too many zeros, and down in the corner, stamped in an ink that only showed under the black light, a little crest, a hawk standing on a set of scales. I knew that crest. Everybody in this city knew that crest if they'd grown up the way I had, on the wrong side of a courtroom, listening to lawyers whisper the Amato name like it might hear them. This wasn't a repair. It was a drop. Somebody was moving a private ledger through the restoration trade, tucked inside instruments nobody would think to search, and I had just peeled back the lid on it in a rented room at 11 o'clock at night with a cat named Biscuit, asleep on the radiator behind me. I reached for my phone to take a photo. My hands were shaking, and I hated that they were shaking. I was 28 years old. I had $31,000 of student debt, and a lease I could barely make, and no living relatives, except a father I visited twice a month behind glass, and none of that had prepared me for the sound of my own atelier door opening when I knew for a fact I had locked it. I wouldn't send that picture, a man said. I turned around so fast I knocked the varnish thinner off the bench. He didn't so much as glance at it. He was tall, dark-suited, with the kind of stillness that isn't calm at all. That's the opposite of calm. That's a held breath. 2 men stood behind him in the stairwell. One of them had his coat open just enough that I saw the shape of what he was carrying, and my whole body went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the draft. "You're the restorer," the man in front said. It wasn't a question. "Fournier." "The shop's closed," I said, which was the stupidest thing I could have said, and we both knew it. He came into the light. Younger than I'd have guessed for someone people were afraid of. Maybe mid-30s, a scar through one eyebrow, eyes so dark they didn't give anything back. He looked at the open cello, at the peeled paper glowing faintly under the lamp, and something in his face closed like a door. "You cleaned it," he said quietly. I didn't know what it was. "No." He almost smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. "That's the problem. You didn't. But somebody's going to assume you did." He nodded at the ledger. "That was supposed to reach me before anyone read a word of it. It didn't reach me. It reached you. And in about 6 hours, the man who sent it is going to hear that a girl with a scalpel in Griffintown saw his private books. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I did. I understood it in my stomach before my head could argue. "I can be quiet," I said. "I don't want any part of this. I'll forget I ever. They won't believe you can be quiet." He said it gently, almost kindly, which was somehow worse. "I know these people. I am God help me, one of these people. Quiet doesn't save you. What saves you is being useful to someone who can protect you before they get to you first. He picked up my phone from the bench, glanced at the unsent photo, and deleted it in front of me without asking. My name is Rafael Amato. That crest you found is my family. And in 3 days, my brother is getting married. And I need a woman on my arm who nobody in that room has ever seen before. Someone who isn't connected to anyone. Someone forgettable. You want me to be your date, I said, to a mob wedding, after breaking into my shop. I want you alive on Saturday, he said. The date is how I keep you close enough to manage that. You'll be safe next to me. You will not be safe anywhere else in this city. Those are your 2 options, and I'm being more honest with you than anyone in my life has ever been. I should have run. I know that's what you're thinking, reading this. I've thought it 1,000 times since. But I want you to understand where I was standing. My father had spent 19 years in a cell for moving money he never touched, framed, so clean. The appeal courts wouldn't even look at it. And I had spent 19 years learning that if you're small and poor and unconnected, the world will bury you and call it justice. And here was the ledger, the actual, physical breathing proof that the Amato family kept 2 sets of books. My father was a forensic accountant. He'd been convicted of hiding money. What if the money he was accused of hiding was in the very columns glowing on my bench? I looked at Rafael Amato, and I asked the question that changed my whole life. If I do this, I said, I have conditions. Behind him, the man with the coat made a small sound, like he couldn't believe I'd said it. Amato just tilted his head, studying me like I was a variable he hadn't accounted for. Go on. I want to keep the ledger. Not the original. I know you can't let that walk out of here. But I want a copy, and I want your word that if there's anything in it about a man named Laurent Fournier and a bank fraud case from 19 years ago, you'll tell me the truth about it. The silence stretched out. The radiator knocked. Biscuit lifted her head, decided none of us were worth the trouble, and went back to sleep. You're his daughter, Amato said slowly, and for the first time something moved behind his eyes. The accountant, the one they put away. He looked at me differently then, not like a problem, like a person. That case was before my time, but I know the name. Everyone in the family knows the name. He was quiet a moment. Get your coat, Miss Fournier, and bring the cat if it matters to you. You're not sleeping here tonight. It mattered to me. I brought the cat. The penthouse he took me to was the kind of place I'd only ever seen in the corner of my eye through restaurant windows. Glass and gray stone above the old port, the river black and enormous below, the lights of the South Shore, strung out along the far bank. His men had names, I learned, and personalities, which surprised me somehow. I'd expected faceless muscle. The driver was Renzo, a heavyset man in his 50s, who'd been with the family 30 years and kept butterscotch candies in his coat pockets, and called me ma petite, within the hour like I was somebody's niece. The younger one, the one with the coat, was Paolo, and he watched everything and said almost nothing, and turned out to be the one who found Biscuit a litter box at midnight without being asked. These were not cartoon villains. That's the thing nobody tells you. They were men with mothers and bad knees, and specific ways they liked their coffee. And that made all of it more frightening, not less. There was a stylist in the morning. A brisk woman named Beatrice, who was, it turned out, the bride herself, dropping off dresses for the family before her own wedding, because that was the sort of family it was. Everyone stitched into everyone else's business. She sized me up in about 4 seconds and pulled a gown the color of champagne from the rack. You'll do, she said, not unkindly. You've got good bones and terrible posture. Stand up straight. Raphael doesn't bring dates, ever. So whoever you are, half that room is going to spend the whole night trying to figure out what you mean. She paused, a pin between her teeth. For your own sake, Cher, decide on an answer before they ask. I stood very straight after that. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep, and I found Raphael on the terrace in the cold, with his suit jacket off, and something dark and heavy laid over the back of a chair. He was checking it, a ballistic vest, close-fitted, the panels flat and matte. He ran his thumb along a seam like he was checking a horse's leg. You wear that to a wedding, I said. I wear it everywhere. He didn't look up. My father died at a christening, my grandfather at a funeral. In this family, the danger comes dressed up. You want to know when to be afraid? Be afraid when everyone's smiling. He set the vest down. Angelo, my brother. He thinks tomorrow is about him and Beatrice and a good bottle of Barolo. He's a decent man, better than me. He believes the peace is real. Something crossed his face, tired and old. It isn't. My uncle has been letting shipments slip for a year, blaming rivals, blaming the police, blaming everyone but himself. And the numbers in that cello are the first hard proof I've had that the money's been walking out the back door. Tomorrow I'll be shaking hands with the man who's been robbing his own blood, and I'll have to smile at him. Your uncle, I said. The word sat strangely in my mouth. Cesare, he said the name like a stone. My father's brother. He ran the family while I was too young, and he never quite forgave me for growing up. He looked at me then, really looked. Why are you out here, Fournier? Because I read your books, I said. All night, and I found my father's name. The terrace went very quiet. 19 years ago, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. There was a transfer scheme, a charity that laundered money for your family, back when your uncle was in charge. When the auditors got close, someone needed a name to hang it on. Someone outside the family. Expendable. I made myself keep going. My father did the books for that charity as a contractor. He didn't know what it was. And when it came apart, your uncle's people fed the prosecution a version where my father was the architect of the whole thing. He got 19 years. His account signatures are in your ledger, but so is Cesare's, over top of every one of them. Authorizing transfers my father was later blamed for. I was crying by then and I hadn't even noticed. My mother died while he was inside. I visit him behind glass. He taught me to read balance sheets when I was 7, and he still asks me, every single time, whether I'm eating enough. Raphael Amato listened to all of it without moving. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. If that's true, he said finally, then my family stole your entire life to save itself a few years of prison. He picked up the vest again, turned it over in his hands. I can't give you back 19 years, but I can tell you this. Tomorrow I go to that wedding to catch my uncle. You came to me to clear your father. Those turn out to be the same errand. He held out his hand. Partners, then. Not a date. A partner. I put my hand in his. It was warm and steadier than mine, and I didn't let go as fast as I should have. The wedding was held at a restored hotel particulier in the old city. The kind of gilded room where the chandeliers cost more than my father's original bail. I have never in my life felt so out of place, and I have also never in my life paid such close attention, because paying attention was the only thing keeping me upright. Raphael's hand stayed at the small of my back the entire evening. Warm and possessive in a way that was pure performance, except for the moments when it wasn't, and I could never quite tell which was which. His grandmother, everyone called her Nana, a tiny woman in black who missed nothing, took one look at me and said something in Italian that made Raphael go still. She says you're not one of ours, he murmured to me. She says that's why she likes you. The uncle was exactly as advertised. Cesare Amato was a handsome, silver-haired man who laughed too easily and touched people too much. The kind of man who makes you feel chosen right up until you realize he does it to everyone. He kissed my hand. He called me a lovely surprise. He asked, so warmly, so gently, where a girl like me had been hiding, and every hair on my arm stood up, because I have spent my career learning to spot a forgery. And that man was a forgery from his cufflinks to his smile. The champagne came around on silver trays. Angelo and Beatrice cut the cake and fed each other laughing. And for a moment even I forgot to be afraid, because it looked so much like happiness. Then a waiter I hadn't seen before set a flute down in front of Raphael, and I saw the man's hands. They were shaking, just slightly, and when he set the glass down, the surface of the champagne fizzed wrong. Too fast, the bubbles coming up in a thin, frantic column near one side, and a faint film sliding across the top that caught the chandelier light oily and strange. I've cleaned solvents off canvas my whole adult life. I know what it looks like when a liquid is carrying something it shouldn't. I knocked the glass over. I did it clumsily, on purpose, my elbow catching the stem, the champagne sheeting across the white tablecloth. Where it touched the wax finish of the table it hissed, very softly, a sound only I was close enough to hear. The waiter was already gone, melted back into the crowd near the kitchen doors. "You clumsy thing," Raphael said loudly, in a voice full of husband and wife exasperation, and his hand around my wrist hard enough to bruise, as he pulled me in like he was checking my dress for stains. His mouth was at my ear. "What did you see?" "The bubbles were wrong," I breathed, and the waiter was terrified. "Don't eat anything. Don't drink anything. That was for you." He straightened, and the mask he wore came down over the fear so completely that I understood, right then, what it must cost to be him every single hour of every single day. His eyes moved across the room and found his uncle laughing by the far window, a full glass in his hand, watching the two of us over the rim. "Cesar didn't send that waiter in," Raphael said, low, "but someone let him pass the door, and there's only one man in this room with the standing to do that." He signaled, small and quick, and Paolo was at his side in seconds, and Renzo appeared with the coats like he'd read the whole thing off the air. "We're leaving. Quietly. Smile." I smiled. My face ached from it. In the car, tearing north along the water with the city smearing gold and red across the wet windows, Raphael made 3 calls in Italian, fast and clipped, and then he turned to me. "The ledger you found is a copy of a shipment manifest," he said. "There's a container coming into the port of Montreal tonight. The last one in a series my uncle has been skimming. If I get to it before his people move it, I have everything. Not just proof he's been robbing the family. Proof that he built the scheme 19 years ago. The scheme they hung on your father." He watched me. "But I can't send you home. Home is where they'll look first. So I'm going to give you a choice, and this time it's a real one. I can put you on a plane out of the country tonight. New name, new papers, and you'll never see me or your father's case again. Or you come with me to the port, and we finish this." The river ran black beside us. Somewhere out there in the dark, my father was asleep in a cell, in a federal penitentiary, 2 hours east of here, dreaming, maybe, of the daughter he taught to read numbers. "I don't want a new name," I said. "I want my father's back. Take me to the port." Raphael looked at me for a long moment. Then, for the first time, he really smiled. Quick and sharp and, I swear, a little bit afraid of me. "Then lose the shoes," he said. "There's a bag in the back. Renzo keeps spares for the men. You'll find boots and a coat that'll swallow you whole. You are not going down to those docks in a ball gown and heels, God help us both." I laughed. I actually laughed, in the middle of all of it. And I changed the back of a speeding car into a pair of men's boots 3 sizes too big, and a canvas coat that smelled of butterscotch and gun oil. And I have never felt more ready for anything in my life. The port of Montreal at 2 a.m. is its own country. Not the peaceful quiet of my workshop. A held quiet. The quiet of stacked steel and idling engines, containers piled into cliffs that blotted out the skyline. The air was thick with diesel and cold river water and wet rope, that flat mineral smell of the St. Lawrence in the dark, and every breath of it fogged in front of me. Raphael went ahead with Paolo, low and fast between the containers, and I stayed at his shoulder because he'd made me promise not to leave it. We found the container by its markings. Raphael had memorized them from the manifest hidden in my cello, a rust-streaked box near the water's edge with 2 men working the doors. What happened next happened faster than I can properly tell it. There was a shout. There was the flat crack of a gun that didn't sound anything like the movies, more like a hammer on sheet metal, and then several of them at once. And Paolo was yelling at me to get down, and I was already down, palms scraping wet concrete, my heart slamming so hard I thought it would crack a rib. I don't know how long it lasted. Not long. When it stopped, the silence had a ringing in it. And then I heard Raphael make a sound I'll never forget. A short grunt, low, wrong. He'd been hit. High on the left side, below the shoulder, above where the vest ended. I know because I got to him before I let myself think. And I saw the blood coming through the panel seam where the plate stopped. Saw it soaking dark into the tactical vest he'd shown me the night before. The one he wore everywhere. The one I'd rolled my eyes at. The vest had stopped 2 rounds flat against his chest. It hadn't stopped the one that clipped him up high. "Get up," I told him. "Get up! We have to go!" "The container," he said. "Paolo has it," I said, because Paolo did, dragging the sealed case out of the doors, even as he pressed his own coat to the wound in Raphael's side. "You're bleeding. Get up. Lean on me." He was a wall of dead weight, a big man going gray in the face, and I wedged my shoulder under his arm and got him upright on pure adrenaline and rage. We stumbled back to the car with Paolo covering us, and Renzo pulling in so fast the tires screamed. And I held Raphael's own hand against the wound the whole way, because he kept trying to let go, kept telling me he was fine, and I kept telling him to shut up, that a man who wore a vest to a wedding didn't get to lie to me about being fine. The safe house was a shuttered fishing cottage on a lake up in the Laurentians, an hour past the last streetlight, cold as the inside of a fridge, and smelling of cedar and dust and old wood smoke. Renzo carried in the case and the first aid kit and a bottle of rye, and Paolo went out to watch the road, and then it was just me and Raphael and a wound I had no business touching. But I have steady hands. It's the one thing my life has given me for free. I've spent years threading gut through cracks, in wood thinner than a hair, and the same stillness that let me clean the furrow the bullet had cut along the top of his shoulder. A graze, deep and ugly, but a graze, and pack it and tape it while he gripped the arm of the couch and swore at the ceiling in 2 languages. "You're a terrible patient," I told him. "You're a terrible mob wife," he said through his teeth. "You brought a cat to a gunfight." "Biscuits at the penthouse," I said. "Renzo's cousin is watching her. Don't change the subject." I taped the last edge down. "There, you'll live. You'll be insufferable, but you'll live." He caught my wrist, gently, this time, the opposite of the wedding, and looked up at me from the couch, with the firelight moving over his face, and for a second neither of us said anything at all. "Why did you come back for me?" he said. "At the port. You could have run. Any sane person would have run." "I don't know," I said, which was a lie, and we both heard the lie in it. 19 years my family stole from you," he said. "And you carried me out of that place with your own 2 hands. You're worth more to my father's case alive than dead," I said. And he laughed, and it turned into a wince. And I put my hand flat against his chest to keep him still, and I felt his heart going under my palm, too fast, and I didn't take my hand away as quickly as I should have. That was becoming a habit with me, not letting go as fast as I should. We sat up all night by the fire going through the case Paolo had pulled from the container. Raphael read the manifests and I read the ledgers, and between the 2 of us, his knowledge of the family and my father's training humming in my hands, we built it, page by page, the whole 19 years of it. Every dollar, every shell, every forged signature where Cesare had written my father's name over his own crimes, and then let a good man rot for it to keep his own hands clean. Somewhere around dawn I found the document I'd been afraid to hope for. The original authorization for the transfer scheme, signed by Cesare Amato, dated 3 weeks before my father was ever brought onto the charity's books. Proof he was framed. Proof, in ink with a date, that a court could not wave away. I put my face in my hands and I cried like I hadn't cried since the day the appeal was denied. And Raphael Amato, a man the whole city was afraid of, sat with his arm bandaged and his shirt bloody and let me cry against his good shoulder, and didn't say a single stupid, comforting thing, which was exactly the right thing to do. The family estate was up in the hills past Mont Tremblant, and we went in the morning, all of us, because Raphael had called Cesare and told him the marriage week peace demanded a sit-down. And Cesare, who thought his nephew was dead in a ditch by the port, could not refuse without admitting what he'd tried to do. We flew in low over the lakes in a floatplane Renzo knew a pilot for, the water below us glittering hard as glass. And Raphael sat with his eyes closed and his jaw tight, running the odds. And I sat holding a locked briefcase full of the only truth I'd ever wanted. We did not land to medics. We landed to men, 6 of them, armed, standing in a half circle on the dock. And behind them, pale and sweating, stood Angelo, Raphael's brother, in the same suit he'd been married in the day before. "Angelo," Raphael called over the dying whine of the propeller, favoring his bad side as he stepped down. "Why are these men here? Where's the house detail?" Angelo wouldn't meet his eyes, and then Cesare came down the path from the great limestone house with his silver hair and his easy smile, and he spread his arms wide like he was welcoming us home. "The house detail answers to me now, nephew," he said, "as they always should have. You've been unwell, making accusations, bringing strays into family business." His eyes flicked to me, cold and amused. "It's time the family had steadier hands. What happened in that room happened the way these things do. Fast and ugly and full of men deciding all at once whose side they were on. But it turned on a piece of paper, in the end, not a gun. Because when Cesare had Raphael's men disarmed and lined against the wall, when he was so sure he'd won that he couldn't stop himself gloating, Raphael simply set the briefcase on the long table between them and opened it. "You let an innocent man rot for 19 years to cover a theft," he said, and his voice carried through that whole silent room. "Laurent Fournier, an accountant. A nobody, you thought. Expendable." "He was expendable," Cesare said, and I watched something in the men along the wall change when he said it. Watched Angelo flinch, watched even Cesare's own soldiers glance at each other. Because there's a thing these men believe about loyalty, twisted and dark as it is, and a man who calls his own blood expendable to save his skin has just told all of them exactly what he'll do to them someday. "No one is expendable," Raphael said. He lifted the original authorization, Cesare's own signature glowing at the top. "This isn't just proof you've been robbing us. It's proof of every crime you buried under this man's name. And I have the ledger. The real one, that a girl in Griffintown pulled out of a cello with a scalpel because you got sloppy." He looked at his uncle without any anger at all, which was somehow the most frightening thing I'd seen all night. "It's over." I braced for what I thought had to come next. I'd read enough court transcripts, sat through enough of my father's stories, to know how this world settled its debts. In the family, rats got buried. That was the rule. I was already flinching from it. Raphael turned to his brother instead. "Angelo, get the car." Angelo blinked. "We don't, Raphael. We handle this ourselves. We don't call. We do this time." Raphael's eyes came to me and held. "Laurent Fournier is in a federal penitentiary, 2 from here for a crime this man committed. The only thing on earth that gets him out is a signed confession and this evidence, delivered to the RCMP and the Crown. If we bury Cesare in these hills, that man dies innocent behind glass and his daughter never gets him back." He looked at his uncle, and I have never heard a sentence land the way this one did. "You won't die tonight, Cesare. You'll go to prison. The same system you fed a good man into for 19 years is going to swallow you whole. And you're going to have all the time in the world to think about it. Death would be a mercy. I'm not feeling merciful." I stared at him. In that world, in that room, he had every reason and every right to take the easy, bloody, private justice his whole life had taught him, and he chose the courts. He chose the slow, cold, ordinary machinery of the law, the same machinery that had failed my father, because it was the only path that led to a cell door opening instead of one closing. He chose my father's freedom over his own revenge, and he did it in front of every soldier in that family, knowing exactly what it cost him to look merciful in a world that reads mercy as weakness. "Thank you," I whispered. It was all I had. He nodded, tired and gray and bleeding through his bandage. "Get the car, Angelo, and call a doctor while you're at it. I think I'm finally done bleeding for 1 week." Angelo wiped his eyes and went. It took 4 months. I want to be honest about that, because the movies end at the dramatic part and real life doesn't. It took 4 months of lawyers, of the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit, of a Crown prosecutor who at first didn't believe a word of it and then couldn't stop reading, of me sitting in beige rooms, explaining varnish and UV ink and hide glue to people who kept asking if I understood the seriousness of tampering with evidence. Cesare's confession, when it finally came because the ledger left him no room to breathe, and because half the men who'd stood along that wall had heard him call his own nephew's blood expendable and quietly stopped taking his calls. My father's conviction was vacated on a cold Tuesday in March. I was there. I'd worn my mother's old coat because it felt like she should be there too. When they walked him out, a smaller man than I remembered, gray now, blinking in the light like something that had lived underground. He didn't hug me first. He held my face in both his hands and looked at me for a long time. And then he said, "Have you been eating enough?" And I laughed and cried so hard I couldn't answer. And that was how I knew it was really him, and really over. He came home with me. He met Biscuit, who despised him for exactly 1 afternoon, and then adopted him completely. And now she sleeps on his chest every night in the spare room of my apartment, and he pretends to be annoyed about the fur on his sweaters. He's slow to trust the quiet. He flinches at locks. But he laughs again, a little more each month. And he's started keeping the books for a community legal clinic that helps people who got the same treatment he did, for free. Because he says somebody has to read the fine print for the people nobody's watching out for. I think it's saving his life more than it's saving theirs. Maybe both. And Raphael. I know that's the part you've been waiting for. He didn't disappear the way I half expected a man like that to disappear, he testified, which stunned everyone, including his own lawyers. Turned crown witness against his uncle, put the family's whole rotten history on the record, and started, painfully and publicly, dragging what was left of the Amato name toward something like the light. Half of it fell apart. Some of the men left. Some of them stayed. Angelo runs the legitimate side now, real estate and restaurants and a construction firm, and Raphael spends more time with lawyers than with soldiers these days. And there are people who will tell you a leopard doesn't change its spots, and maybe they're right. I only know what I saw. I saw a man choose the harder good in a room full of easier evils, with his own blood on the floor for a stranger's father. He came to the atelier a year after it all ended, on a Friday night, when he knew I'd be alone with a clamped instrument and the space heater ticking. He didn't break the lock this time. He knocked. "I have something for you," he said, and I braced for a ring because I'd learned by then that the world he came from settled everything with grand, expensive gestures. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, flat, folded thing and pressed it into my hands. It was the paper. The onion skin ledger, or rather one page of it. The corner I'd first peeled back under the UV lamp. The one with the Hawkinscales crest that had started all of it. He'd had the rest of it entered into evidence, sealed away. But he'd kept this one square, and had it cleaned and pressed flat behind glass, small enough to fit in a pocket. "To remind me," he said. "Of what?" "That you saw what nobody else could." He closed my fingers over it, the glass cool against my palm. "You looked at a thing everyone else called finished, and you saw the truth hiding under the surface. You saw me before I'd have shown anyone." He wasn't smiling now. He was, I realized, terrified, which for a man like him was its own kind of confession. "I'm not going to pretend I'm a good man, but I'd like to spend the rest of my life becoming one, and I would very much like to do it next to you. Not for anyone's cameras. Not for any family. For us." I looked at the crest in my hands, the mark that had cost my family 19 years, and given it back. And then I looked at him, this impossible, frightening, changed man standing in the doorway of the one place on earth I'd ever felt safe, waiting, actually waiting, for a small poor girl with steady hands to decide his whole life. "I have conditions," I said, and Raphael Amato smiled. A real one, this time, all the way to his eyes, because it was the same thing I'd said to him in that atelier the night everything began, and we both knew exactly what it meant. "I'd expect nothing less," he said. Somewhere behind me on the radiator, warm and unbothered by any of it, the cat began to purr.